Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. Imagine you were a country who had an absolutely horrible human rights record, and you once murdered well over 10,000 of your own students for rightfully protesting against your tyrannical rule. Despite this mass murder of innocent students, American internet companies still wanted to do business with you so badly, in fact, that they're willing to blot the murder of those 10,000 plus students from the internet so that your people would forget the atrocity that you committed against them. Now imagine your country had a deal with a thriving British territory who previously enjoyed freedom of the press and commerce, had a robust economy, and you agree that you would only receive that territory back from Great Britain on the condition of leaving their democratic system for the most part alone. But because you're a corrupt communist regime, you went back on that promise and took the territory back by force, squashing the free press and imprisoning dissenters and imposing communism. And again, now imagine the world's reaction, but especially the leader of the free world, America, essentially said nothing when you perpetrated the crime. We're just getting started. Now imagine that you are a country that did all of these things, but add to your list of human rights violations, you commit genocide against your own people by imprisoning 1 million Muslims, Uyghurs, you guys know this, in the northern provinces of China. You historically have drowned perhaps millions of baby girls because you believe your population is just too many women and not enough men. And you track and spy on your citizens' every move and socially score them based on their subservience or lack thereof to your communist regime. Oh yes, and did I also mention that your communist country, a regime that recently appointed its dictator, who likes to call himself a president, but he's actually a dictator. He made himself a forever leader, and he also gets offended by Winnie the Pooh in the most amusing of ways. There won't be any elections needed because you're terrified of Winnie the Pooh, communist country leader, is like all other communist country leaders. He doesn't care who its people want for a leader. Now, again, none of this matters to anybody, apparently, because the press in the West celebrates you. In fact, other democratic countries line up to do business with you, taking advantage of your slave labor, and so you become a manufacturer to the world. You sell your poor in order to sell to the rich. So your country becomes wealthy and more emboldened. And because you can get away quite literally with murdering your own people, that also helps. So you now begin to feel that you can just do pretty much anything, like build islands in the South Sea and international waters and install military bases on them. And then you violate sovereign airspace over Taiwan and you threaten the staunch American ally with invasion. And you talk about how that sovereign nation is really yours. And after taking back Hong Kong and violating your agreements, you clearly mean it. And you do all of this after recently playing around with a dangerous coronavirus grown in a lab in Wuhan, attempting to give that virus gain of function that would make it highly contagious to humans. But then after the virus escaped, right? Are we still with lab escape theory, or is YouTube going to block this video too? Because a bunch of, sorry losers out there, I can't stand any kind of speculation, even that academically based. But instead of warning the world, you allow people infected with that virus to fly out across the world, causing a once in a 100-year pandemic. And you allow flights filled with infected citizens out. Even though you already shut down your own domestic airspace, you still allow flights out from Wuhan. And then you tell a virus origin story about a crazy wet market that's super misleading, mistaking dealing with making the whole issue of trying to navigate and manage the pandemic even harder. Your carelessness and your negligence and your just plain evilness cost millions of lives and ruined tens of millions more. Sickening people, causing lockdowns, which caused depression and suicide rates to spike, destroying businesses and economies. And frankly, the virus you very likely manufactured in a lab, come at me, YouTube, literally changed the world overnight, stripping people of their freedoms, their freedom to move, their freedom to worship, to work, and even really to make choices about what medicines they put in their body. But see, you don't pay a dime for any of the damage that you caused, even though that damage would be easily in the trillions of dollars. And after all of this, still nobody calls you on it. Not the World Health Organization, not the press, and most importantly, not America. An America who is so now dependent on your manufacturing and cheap factory labor and antibiotics, to say nothing of rare earth minerals, it will not stand up to you at all. In fact, corporations like the NBA, actors in Hollywood bow down to you like John Cena, fearful of losing access to that lucrative movie market. And your outlaw country grows even bolder. So who is this corrupt crime syndicate that poses as some sort of legitimate government? I mean, obviously, it's the Communist Party of China. My goal is to get banned there. The CCP, I literally want to get banned there. I never want them to allow me in their country. Not that I would ever go there, but I want them to state that I'm banned. That's like a goal in life. No, the CCP have never felt more emboldened to do whatever it is that they feel like, and why shouldn't they? I mean, they've never paid a price, certainly not from the Biden administration or the American press, because they still think Donald Trump created the Wuhan pandemic. just like they thought George Bush went down to the Gulf of Mexico and stirred his finger in the water and created Katrina. So if you are China, far from learning a lesson from your past crimes and violations of international law and human rights, if you're the CCP, you learn that bullying the world, especially America, hey, it works. It leads to big gains in international stature, territory, and influence. And you know, they have a weak, muddling career politician leading America who doesn't have the energy or conviction to challenge the CCP's dominance. And that emboldens you further, which may explain why the CCP just attacked another American company, this time Microsoft. In fact, here's the story from the AP. They say, quote, the Biden administration and Western allies formally blamed China on Monday for a massive hack of Microsoft Exchange's email server, their software, and asserted that criminal hackers associated with the Chinese government have carried out ransomware and other illicit cyber operations. The announcements, though not accompanied by any sanctions against the Chinese government, of course, were intended as a forceful condemnation of activities a senior Biden administration official described as part of a pattern of irresponsible behavior in cyberspace. And then they highlighted the ongoing threat from Chinese hackers, even as the administration remained consumed with trying to curb these ransomware attacks from Russia-based syndicates, right? Remember all of those? They went after the Colonial Pipeline, et cetera. They've targeted some pretty critical infrastructure. The broad range of cyber threats from Beijing disclosed on Monday. That included a ransomware attack from a government-affiliated hackers. They were affiliated with the CCP. They targeted victims, including the U.S., with demands for millions of dollars. Now, U.S. officials allege that the criminal contract hackers associated with China's Ministry of State Security have engaged in cyber extortion schemes and theft for their own profit, end quote. Now, it's a big quote. The cyber hack is not the action of a regime that respects or fears America. I mean, after all the misdeeds and crimes that I just listed, the CCP is not watching its P's and Q's. Do people still say that? Far from it. It's busy attacking America. And the CCP is not just attacking America. Japan's showing some real cojones, right? Unlike America right now. They said that they would defend Taiwan should China attempt a hostile takeover of the country. Here's the video response from China. It is total, it's like Karening intensified on 11D. This is literally the CCP threatening to nuke Japan. Like first use of nukes, right? They said they would launch nukes at them endlessly, was the quote. Not in self-defense, but literally as a first strike. If Japan sent a single soldier to defend Taiwan, a sovereign nation and ally to America. And what has the Biden administration said about any of this? Nothing, because they're busy with pronouns. This is the problem. When you have a bully running around the schoolyard, the only thing that stops the bully is confronting them. Now, I am not suggesting a war. I realize that we live in a binary tribal environment and everyone wants to just be the lowest common denominator analyst and suggest that your options are either war, endless war, or do nothing. No, there is actually nuance. It's not entirely dead yet. What I'm suggesting is that we take a page from JFK and Ronald Reagan in dealing with another evil communist empire, the Soviet Union. See, in 1962, when Soviets sent their nukes to Cuba so that they would be a few hundred miles from America, JFK did what you have to do with international communist bullies. He ordered a naval blockade around the island, which blocked Russia's entry into ports of Cuba. It was a very high-stakes gamble. And Soviet leader Khrushchev, he balked, realizing that the move might actually lead to real nuclear exchanges with the U.S. Exactly 25 years later, then you had a very more courageous U.S. president whose brother didn't leave a woman to drown in a pond. Actually, wasn't that like this anniversary of that just a couple of months ago? I think so. He had the conviction to stand up for America and confront the same evil empire. Watch.
There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
That's what having balls looks like. Only 2 years later, that very wall, the Berlin Wall, a wall erected by the Soviet Union, which divided Europe, separated families, plunged Eastern Europe into a communist nightmare of poverty, that wall fell suddenly, almost overnight. And just as suddenly, the entire Soviet Union collapsed. See, it actually matters how America responds to evil communist regimes. And it doesn't take missiles, it doesn't take a war to turn the tide of history. You just stand up for freedom like Reagan did. I know a lot of people look back at JFK and Bay of Pigs, but at least someone had the wherewithal to say something, to do something other than just say, that's a no-no, you shouldn't do that. No, it takes a willingness to actually call it evil when you see it, and let allies know that we stand firm in our convictions about liberty and human rights. Occasionally, we do have to remind the world that America is a peaceful nation, not a passive one. In the face of evil, we will act, not because we want war, but because we want greater peace and freedom in the world. And communist regimes that commit genocide, threaten their neighbors with nuclear war, sicken the world with man-made viruses, because let's just say it out loud, both biological and digital, communist regimes like these, the CCP, must be confronted. Communism was the first great virus. This nation, America, is the most powerful empire in the history of the world. We can project our power in unimaginable ways. And our military, without equal. What we say matters, sidebar, for right now. The wokery's getting a little much. It does matter, though, what we say to evil regimes like the CCP, who grow more emboldened as they continue their crime wave against the world, violate treaties, expand their reach against international law. Now, look, Trump may not have been liked by the communists, just as the Soviets didn't like Reagan, but like Reagan, Trump and America, they were respected, at least by the CCP, because when you mess around, you find out, and they didn't want to mess around all that much. So this matters a lot. Right now, we're navel-gazing. We have an administration that's talking about white supremacy, a riot of gravy seals on January 6th, foolish things like reparations and personal pronouns, and everybody's arguing over who can use whose bathroom. Meanwhile, our enemy, and make no mistake, they are the enemy. Any communist is an enemy. They're on the move. And they're on the move because they don't respect the United States. That lack of respect is on display every single day. The CCP intends to be the sole superpower in the world, and they don't plan on playing by the rules in order to get that position. So America should really wake up to reality. The communist threat, you could say it's back, but it really never left. It just got quiet. And it's more dangerous than ever, as demonstrated by the pandemic. This is becoming a real defining challenge for the Biden administration. So will they continue to look inward? Spend their time criticizing, persecuting their own citizens, chasing white supremacy boogeyman? Sidebar, have you seen white supremacists? Have you seen them? They couldn't do a pull-up if their life depended upon it. Or will you criticize the true threat to freedom, democracy, and world stability, the international criminal enterprise known as the Chinese Communist Party? It's also predictable. Crime keeps rising in Democrat cities, and they're scrambling to do some damage control. Curtis Hill, the former Indiana Attorney General, he joins us next to discuss it. Stay with us. Thank you for watching The First TV and supporting the only network dedicated to protecting free speech. You can watch my program live or on demand at any time with the First TV app. And the best part, the First TV app is 100% free. Just search the First TV in the App Store or on your phone, tablet, or smart TV and download it today. Democrats are realizing now that they have a crime problem on their hands, and America's pretty tired of it. I can't even imagine what the internal polling looks like. So they are scrambling to fix this problem that, don't doubt it for a second, they did create with their policies. Curtis Hill, former Indiana Attorney General, he joins us now to talk about it. Mr. Hill, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Dana, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I was looking at, because I know you've talked about this quite a bit, and you've been tweeting about this. I was looking at some of your social media, some of your remarks earlier, and I had to bring up, because last week we had New York Governor Andrew Cuomo come out and say, well, really it's more people are dying from gun violence and crime than coronavirus, but he never actually, in any of his proposals as to how to solve this problem, it never went into deterrence for criminals. It never went into making sure that, whatever reforms we need to strengthen good policing, that any of that is passed. It all seemed to kind of rest on the shoulders of just the law-abiding and the innocent, who would like to actually be able to protect themselves since the police are defunded. And now it seems that every other, whether they're governor or mayor of a blue state or blue city, they've now adopted these talking points. And I'm curious as to your take on all of this.
Well, this has been the longstanding policy of Democrats and liberals with regard to justice, creating a social justice atmosphere. So you see it in big cities where big city DAs have taken blanket statements that there are whole lots of criminal laws that they're just going to abandon, disregard, as though they were the legislative body. That's not a prosecutor's function. If we look back at the history of this, we've seen crime rising now as a result of policies that have been in place for the last few years, attacking what they call mass incarceration. Well, I got news for you. Just a few short years ago, We saw in this country a dramatic reduction in murder rate, and a 50% reduction over 30 years. We saw rape and violent crime, 30 to 40% reduction over that same 30-year period. What that tells me, Dana, is that we were locking up the right people. In this nation, there's the vast majority of crime is committed by a very small percentage of people. And if we effectively deal with that small percentage of people that are repeat offenders, if we lock them up, we can show a dramatic reduction in crime and increase the public safety.
And you bring up a really good point. We're talking to Mr. Curtis Hill, former AG of Indiana. You bring up a really good point. I was looking at some of New York State's, some of the policies that they had. They had passed this bail reform, cashless bail, just basically letting people just kind of sign and walk. And it was so disastrous, they had to start. I mean, it's not fun. I mean, it's funny that they thought this would work, but it's incredibly sad because of the torture that it put innocent people through, because the murders increased as a result of this. This is one of the things that their police had even cited. They had to walk back portions of that bill because there were numerous people that they would just allow to walk, and then a couple of hours later, and one of the stories that I had gone over, committed murdered a teenager in Chicago. The same difference. One of the lowest prosecution rates, for instance, of felony gun charges, but also when it comes to murder, drugs, gang violence, assault. I mean, it seems as though you have these prosecutors and these judges that give wrist slaps, or they just drop charges altogether. And it amazes me I understand that they have discretion, but at what point is it discretion and then just insanity? And what can be done to maybe prevent that from happening? I mean, is that the DOJ's job?
Well, Dana, there's a big difference between discretion, which is in a particular individual case, a prosecutor, and I was one for a number of years, a prosecutor evaluates the case, reviews the evidence, and proceeds accordingly, using discretion to move forward or not. That's entirely appropriate. But what prosecutors are doing in terms of making blanket assessments and even pronouncements of offenses that they will not prosecute. We're not going to prosecute prostitution. We're not going to prosecute drug crimes. We're not going to prosecute defecating on the sidewalk. I mean, these are ridiculous statements, and it's abdicating their responsibility as law enforcement officials, and they're invading the province of the legislature and, in effect, vetoing the will of the people. This is not the way that prosecutors should operate. Prosecutors should uphold the law, move forward, and I'm very appalled at what I've been seeing over the course of the last few years in the state of prosecutions and law enforcement.
Yes, and you had a really good editorial where you were kind of talking about this environment of lawlessness too that's been created, and some of that you use as an example the Chaz Chop. I know they changed their name in Seattle, where they had this kind of autonomous zone, these protest zones. And the crime there, they didn't want police to intervene, and sadly, a teenager lost his life in one of these protest zones. And this, I want you to speak a little bit to the environment of lawlessness, because I can't imagine anything emboldening criminal activity than having your city or your mayor, your governor, just allow you to take over a couple of city blocks and do whatever you want.
Well, we saw it all over the country. In the aftermath of George Floyd, you had police officers lined up, ready to do their job, and then being told to stand down by their local or state leadership. So we saw countless numbers of people going into stores, looting, walking right in front of the police, attacking the police. And we wonder why lawlessness is expanding the way that it is. If I'm a police officer, and keep in mind, Dana, we have given these folks the authority. We've given them a gun and a badge, and we've said, protect us and sacrifice your life if need be. And yet we don't back the police. We don't support the police. And we see all of these attacks coming on board. It's no wonder that we have any police at all. And if we're going to have the police stand down during riots and tense situations, well, guess what? The criminals get an understanding of what they can get away with. And that's what we brought onto ourselves.
Yeah, you mentioned funding and support for police as well. I was looking at this USA Today poll, and this is one of the most recent ones, a USA Today Ipsos poll that says fewer than 1 in 5 support defund the police. And every group, whether it's Black Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans, they want police to maintain a local presence. It sounds like Democrats are kind of out of touch with voters here.
Well, it's a stupid thing. I mean, the folks who get the most protection by the police are people in low-income neighborhoods where crime is rampant. The good folks in those neighborhoods want the police. They need the police. And so this idea that we can simply wave a magic wand and make crime go away, these folks are bad people, and it's time that we wake up and smell the coffee. We're looking at people who are out engaging in bad activities, and it's not always a racist situation. Sometimes you're just dealing with someone who is no good and needs to be addressed in that way. And in many instances, these are folks who have committed multiple felony offenses. And if we would certainly respond accordingly in the criminal justice system, like we were doing a few years ago, we would see greater reductions in crime and increases in public safety.
I wanted to get your thoughts on this announcement that came out last week that Democrats were looking to expand Capitol Police offices across the country. Although I think originally they were just looking at Florida and California, and they had said that it was the need to protect elected officials when they would return home to their home districts, which I always thought was the job of the local police there in their jurisdictions. Do you think that that's kind of a first step maybe in flirting with this idea of a federalized police force?
Well, it may not be the first step. It's a step in a long line of action towards that, and it's absolutely insane. Policing is a local matter. Public safety is a local matter. And how ironic it is that folks who want to allow lawlessness all over the country for the rest of us want special protections for themselves. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. We have to have a society that respects the rule of law, and we have to have policing that is consistent for all of us. We don't want to give stronger protections to those who are in government. For crying out loud, that's not exactly what we're all about. So this effort to sort of nationalize the police and create a standard, well, whose standard is it? I don't want to live by the standard of the New York State police system. I live in a conservative community. We expect people to be accountable for their behavior. We expect to hold them accountable for their behavior. And those are local decisions that we need to make sure are supported by the people through their elected officials.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question for you, Mr. Hill. Appreciate your time with us today as well. You mentioned, and I thought this was incredibly interesting, you were talking about how crime was on a downward trend, really, and it's only. I know in a couple of cities it's has actually increased, but it was interesting because in looking at, for instance, some of the UCRs, the Universal Crime Reports from the FBI. It does kind of go in line with the pandemic and with the lockdown. For instance, auto theft increased. Certain things that were related to maybe people being out and about, crime of opportunity, et cetera, that actually decreased. Home burglaries decreased, et cetera. But I think drug and auto theft, those were crimes that were cited as having increased. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that I know we had, violent crime, which was at its lowest record since the early to mid 90s. It's been quite a long time. And it's still actually relatively low, even with these increases in some of these major metropolitan areas. The lockdown had something to do with a lot of that. But even as things have been opening up, from everything that I've seen, crime hasn't, skyrocketed. I don't think it's really fair for some of these other elected officials to say that, yes, crime's always a problem, but it does seem like a little bit of fear-mongering.
It's absolutely fear-mongering. We shut down the government. We demonstrated that America was afraid on a variety of fronts, whether it was the pandemic, COVID, wearing masks, vaccination. We've got lots of confusion going on right now. Many people don't know who to trust. And in this environment, it's very easy for folks to take advantage. We also have a very heightened sense of racial awareness, of racial issues, many of which are unfounded, but are planted directly to create and cause fear. So that is emboldening a lot of people to take action, bad actions that they would otherwise not do. So in the past year, it's no surprise to me that we've had increases in criminal activity. Certainly, to get back to record years, it will take some time, but you're talking about 30% or better in most major cities for the increase in violent crime. Something is really wrong, and if you look at what's going on in these cities, these are cities that are run by Democrats who claim to have a better way. Well, I think the American people need to take a good hard look at that and go back to the standards of accountability that have been working year after year.
That's a very good point. Curtis Hill, pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dana.
Cuba is still trying to shut down access to the internet for citizens. But a bipartisan bill championed by Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee is helping Cuban activists regain access. See, I was serious, like put a boat right up to the border there in the water and then make Wi-Fi accessible. That's how you do it. We'll tell you all about it. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. He's not just Twitter tough. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company invites you to enjoy your coffee, no matter what you're doing, whether you're arguing with someone over the internet or you just want to just crack open a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission, whatever it is. Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever the summer takes you. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV and order yours. And you can use my code, proudly offered, DanaTV, at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Support vets and fuel your summer with America's coffee. Black Rifle Coffee. A bipartisan bill championed by Senator Marsha Blackburn is helping Cuban activists regain access to the internet after the communist regime shut it down. Senator Blackburn is here to tell us all about it. Senator, welcome. So glad that you're doing this.
Well, thank you. This is something that Representative McCall over in the House and Senator Menendez and I here in the Senate had worked on last year. And, you know, it's really kind of cool when the government actually has a program that works as intended. And this is the Open Technology Fund. And this fund, Dana, supports a technology. It's called Sci-Fi. And Sci-Fi allows people that are in countries where the internet has been cut off to actually access the internet using proxy networks. And right now, we know that you've got about 1.5 million Cubans that are accessing the internet through Sci-Fi. This is how we're getting those pictures out of things that are happening there on the streets. It's how we're able to observe the oppression that the communist regime is carrying out against the citizens of Cuba.
Yeah, some of those videos are unbelievable. I watched one video of the regime's police force try to arrest a mother who was carrying a baby simply because she was walking alongside of someone that had a sign that was speaking out against the communist regime. And that is so incredibly important, Senator. And I can't even imagine what would happen and what would happen to these people if they didn't have access, didn't have any way to get these videos out. I just keep thinking of the Green Revolution in Iran and how for a period there was kind of a blackout until people were cobbling together resources to make it to where people could show everyone what the Ayatollah, what the regime was doing there. And so I shudder to think, Senator, what would actually happen in an information blackout there?
Well, we all shudder to think what would happen if there were information blackouts. And we have seen so many times in the past where people were struggling to get their message out. And that is the reason for supporting this fund and allowing this investment in technology that will bring this information forward using these proxy networks so that people that are in Cuba are able to send this video and send these interviews that they're doing to their family or to people contacts that they have that are here in the U.S. and then get this on the internet so people can actually see what's taking place.
Yes, and that's incredibly important. Of course, I have to ask you your thoughts in response to the administration last week. Mayorkas going out there, DHS, saying that these Cuban refugees, and I'm gonna go back to the tech here because I have a lot more questions tech related. But when DHS's Mayorkas went out and said, well, the border's closed for Cuban refugees. But I just read a story on air, not 2 hours ago, Senator, talking about how the coronavirus positive cases are increasing at the border because you have thousands of people who are at the border trying to enter illegally, but yet I've not really heard anything from Mayorkas on that.
Well, what they're doing is pick and choose the type of refugees that they want to have in this country. which is so wrong. And you look at that southern border, and all you have to do is look at the vaccination rates from the countries that are entering the U.S. And then you have to say, okay, could this be why there is a spike in these border counties? And we know that the administration is turning every town into a border town, every state into a border state, because they are sending these migrants all across the U.S. They are chartering planes and then flying them to different cities and counties so that they can transfer the cost for education, healthcare, child services, social services, housing to these counties and states. And for Mayorkas to say, well, but to the Cuban refugees, don't come because we're not going to let you in. You can't do this. You know, we are a nation of laws, and you cannot pick and choose.
Yeah, you can. And to that point, and this might be, I understand we're in a very hyper politically tribal time. But at the same time, you know, I went back and I was looking at some of the reports as to how Cuban Americans, when they immigrated to the United States or if they came in seeking asylum, how they registered, you know, before when they were registering to vote. And since 2010, it's something like 76 to 5%, overwhelmingly, Cuban Americans are registering as Republicans. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with it, without hyping up the political, you know, the gap too much. But still, I just wonder if that factors into it.
Well, we all wonder that because Cubans are very entrepreneurial, they are very pro-life, they are very conservative, and they truly focus on taking care of their family and their extended family. So you have to say, is this what the Democrats are doing? They don't want the Cubans to come in because they're afraid they're going to be Republican. And they think that they can have individuals coming from the Northern Triangle countries, as well as the 160 countries around the globe from which they're coming, let them come in the southern border, and then have them vote as Democrats.
Yeah, I want to switch gears and because I know you've talked about this. You've gotten into a fight with China's some members of their Communist Party before. I was amazed to see this video. Not only did it come out through their propaganda website, they deleted it, but then they put it back up elsewhere. It's a 6-minute video, and it's just to make it short. I mean, China threatened to nuke Japan if Japan even sent one troop, one soldier to protect or defend Taiwan. And what gets me is that this is first strike. This is first use of nuclear capability. That's what they're threatening, and I think that the quote that they had was endlessly. They will use nuclear bombs continuously until Japan declares unconditional surrender for the second time. And then they edited this footage in, as you know, Senator. They edited this footage into that of some World War II. I got to get your response on this, because this doesn't seem as though any kind of deterrence from the Biden administration is working.
The Biden administration has decided that they are going to speak very softly, and they are not going to carry a stick at all when it comes to dealing with these countries. And we know that appeasement does not work. You can look at how we dealt with China during the Trump years. And Donald Trump did things that others have not been able to do. He was able to get China to the negotiating table on trade deals. We got better trade deals. He was able to deal with them on currency manipulation and to bring that back under control. He was able to deal with them on their military aggression. And now that Donald Trump is gone, it is like they know Joe Biden is not going to hold them to account. So they're very aggressive when it comes to the commercial sector. They are pushing with great power competition. They are expanding their Belt and Road Initiative. We see them pushing forward on countries on debt diplomacy. They are very aggressive in building their blue water navy. And then as they are putting ports in places like Djibouti, there in the Horn of Africa, they are co-locating a military base and putting some of their submarines and some of their ships and carriers there. So we have to be aware that China is on a mission. They are focused on a 100-year marathon, and they plan to be globally dominant by the time we get to the midpoint of this century.
And here we are in our military focusing on pronouns and woke politics and everything else. And oh my heavens. And of course, policing people through social media, which was where I wanted to take.
Bear in mind,
sorry, go ahead.
Bear in mind, the military should focus on lethality. That should be their focus. They are there to defend this nation, providing for the common defense. We expect them to focus on lethality.
That's a great point. And military readiness, which they are clearly not doing.
Right.
One of the issues that you've been very outspoken about, Senator, is that of Facebook. And of course, of the technical, the social media surveillance, I guess, or babysitting of free citizens. And we had another amazing, insane soundbite today from the comms director over at the White House. This was after Jen Psaki just last week was talking about how, yes, the White House is flagging for Facebook. They're so helpfully letting Facebook know the posts that they don't like so that Facebook can take it down. And it almost sounds like that the White House is nagging them to take these posts down. And then, of course, you had the comms director for the White House today come out and say, yes, absolutely. And then expand it to conservative website, Senator. I am so curious as to your thoughts on this, because to me it sounds like the administration wants to, it's like they make our point for us with these social media platforms, not acting as just a facilitator and instead editorializing in violation of 230.
I have to tell you, God bless President Donald Trump for filing that lawsuit against big tech. And I think that the actions of the White House are helping him. They are making his point for him. And no doubt, Jen Psaki got hauled into the White House General Counsel's office after she spilled the beans and said, well, we have people that are on staff who are going through and they have come up with this list of people, and there are 12 entities, and they're watching these posts and they're flagging these posts. And if we consider this to be misinformation or disinformation, then we're flagging these. So Facebook, and I'm sure other social media providers, can take these posts down. Well, first of all, that is a violation of someone's free speech. And you know, Dana, I may not agree with somebody, but they have a right to go out here and speak their mind and not be punished for speaking their mind. That is what free societies do. You can laugh at things that people say. You can disagree with things that what people say. Something someone said can really anger you, but you do not have the right to censor them, to block them, to keep them from saying whatever it is that they want to say. So for the White House to say, we have our target list, we are watching these, we are going to pull down these posts that we don't like, this amounts to government-approved messaging, and the government, this administration, using the full force of this administration to be the thought police or the language police. And of course, we all remember back in January, they said, well, we think we need a truth czar or a reality czar.
Right.
And everybody thought, oh, that's pure craziness. But look at what they've done now.
And it also affects policy on health. And one of the issues, Senator, and you've also spoken about this, I feel so bad for so many who, those people who are, I guess the press describes as vaccine hesitant, because they're not against vaccines. They would like a little bit more data. And there's a great piece in the Wall Street Journal about it today that discusses how a lot of the numbers there, the CDC actually hasn't dived into and discovered if there were comorbidities. They're just counting positive cases, and they're not even looking as to whether there were other underlying factors. That does actually, it does muddle the data. But long story short, what was misinformation maybe 6 months ago with lab leak and was censored and was removed on Facebook is now you even have the President of the United States giving light and credibility to the discussion of lab leak. So whose science is right? Whose facts are right? And why do social media companies, who made them the arbiters of this?
Well, Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey did not write the First Amendment. And it is not up to them to decide what is or is not free speech. And when it comes to things that are considered misinformation, you're exactly right. They didn't want to talk about gain of function research. They didn't want to talk about a possible lab leak. And those of us who brought it up and said, maybe we should be looking, could this be an engineered virus? What was going on in that lab? That lab was a level 2 lab and not a level 3 or 4 that generally does the more complicated research. Why was money going to this lab in China rather than going to labs like the one in Nashville or the one over in North Carolina at UNC? So you have to ask those questions, because these dollars that are being expended do not belong to the federal government. Those are taxpayer dollars. And when you have a virus that has caused 600,000 Americans to lose their lives and has caused hundreds of thousands of Americans to lose loved ones or to lose livelihoods or to cause inconvenience, then you have to ask the questions on behalf of the taxpayer, on behalf of, in my case, all the Tennesseans that I represent. Right. And it's not
they paid a lot of tax dollars to get some data.
Anybody, you just need to know exactly what happened so it never happens again.
Amen to that. Senator Marsha Blackburn from the beautiful state of Tennessee. So good to see you, Senator. So appreciate you also out there being loud about these issues and getting some action on them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, folks, another billionaire has gone into space. This time it's Jeff Bezos. It's like the billionaire space summer. Woo! We'll tell you all about it when we return. Billionaire boy space summer. Another billionaire has gone to space, and I know that you're probably super annoyed with big tech. I get it. And it's super easy to hate on the billionaire class for all their self-importance. I still think these flights of fancy into space are completely worth celebrating. Why? Because these forays into zero gravity are not about Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson. They're about the power of the private sector, the beautiful private sector. It's interesting that private companies have picked up the mantle of space exploration from the public sector, because it was NASA, a government agency, of course, that got us to the moon on the taxpayer's dollar. But just lately, it seems that America has stopped pushing out into that final frontier. And I get it, there's issues. Maybe we navel gaze at our own flaws in a metaphorical mirror all day, but enter the private sector. And this is what the private industry does best. And it spots a vacuum in the marketplace, something that needs to be done. See a need, fill a need, something that people want done. And then the private sector fills that need and makes a profit doing so, because God bless capitalism. Now, Jeff Bezos' company, Blue Origin, wants to make space travel common. And the mission is to create a future where millions of people are living and working in space to benefit Earth. Now soon, Blue Origin, like Branson's Virgin Galactic, will begin flying people into space regularly. Of course, the tickets aren't cheap, $250,000 for a ride on Virgin Galactic, for instance. But that's kind of how new tech always starts, very expensive. That $4,000 flat screen that you bought for $1,000, right, about a decade ago, a far inferior flat screen with plasma technology might have cost you $10,000. Of course, Only the rich could afford those early flat screens, just like only the rich can afford to go into space right now. I'm cool with it. But by funding these excursions, the cost of going to space, just like the cost of everything else, flying on a plane or buying a flat screen, that comes down as the technology becomes more efficient. Thank you, private sector, which ultimately benefits you and me, right? And there are problems on Earth, yes, we get it, they need attention. But we always have to keep an eye on the future, and we can multitask, right? Have people forgotten this? The private sector does this better than the government, plain and simple. It's not the government that's making electric cars. It's not the government that did a worldwide satellite and actually even started Wi-Fi, really technically. Tesla and SpaceX, all of that, they've done it. Private sector's done it. It's not the government that invents breakthrough medical technologies. It's biotech companies that do it. I mean, the government can't even deliver the right meal consistently and at a profit, much less go to space, right? I mean, that's why the post office has to be bailed out so much. So here's a toast, but not to Jeff Bezos or Branson or even Elon Musk. Although these folks are able to start businesses down in a basement and end up in space, nothing short of a miracle. And that's thanks to their ingenuity and their sacrifices early on. But the real toast is to the system of private sector and capitalism, which incentivizes invention and innovation. And for particularly Bezos, that's the American system, and now later Musk. And the patent to that free market system, it's available to anybody who wants it. Just get the government out of the way as much as possible. Unleash everybody's creativity in the marketplace. Let them earn the dollars, keep most of their profit because they earned it, they sacrificed it. I mean, I'm sorry, did any of you sleep on Elon Musk's factory floor? Because I know I didn't. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, I mean, the Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, there's no telling how high they and ultimately humanity can go. I celebrate that. So that does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.